The uniform haircut is also referred to as a 90-degree layered haircut. And the reason for that is that all the hair is held at 90 degrees from the head, following the shape of the head as it is cut. It is also all cut to the same length. So if you're cutting to 4.5 inches in the crown, you should be 4.5 inches on the sides, in the back, in the nape, everywhere. And that makes a uniform haircut where all the hair on the head is the same length and follows the curve of the head. The game plan for the uniform haircut is on our website. The sectioning that we start with is 8. We start by following our reference points, finding the parietal ridge or parietal ridge. We find our apex once we have that top sectioned out and use a horizontal line to divide the top into 2 parts, our front and our crown. We continue that line to behind the ears to create our front sides. Then we make a 6-point parting down the center of the head, and from behind the ear, a horizontal parting that runs across the lower part of the occipital bone, and that leaves us our 2 sections in the nape. So we have 1 our front, 2 our crown, 3 and 4 being our sides, 5 and 6 being just above the occipital bone, and 7 and 8 being the nape area. The degrees, of course, that we're holding the hair at is 90 degrees, and we need to make sure that we're following the shape of the head and are aware that the head curves in the front, it curves at the parietal ridge, and it curves at the occipital bone. So we need to make change wherever those reference points are. We know there's a change in the head shape. So that's why it's so important to understand your reference points and where they are. The head position is just going to be a natural fall position. The stylist body position, it's going to be a couple of places. First, when we cut the crown area, we're going to stand at the opposite side of being cut. So if I'm cutting my right side, I'm going to stand on my left side. It's going to be my body, my guideline, and the hair to be cut. And when I cut the left side, it will be my body on the right side, and it will be my body, my guideline, and the hair to be cut. So in that crown area, you're standing on the side. When you go to cut around the head, this area here, we're going to be pulling that hair out and standing directly behind the section being cut. So we have a couple of things to consider for stylist body position. There really is no finger shift, but there is, your fingers change position as you follow the curve of the head. So be aware of that. The cutting line we're going to use is straight, but you can also shatter this do this entire cut with a shattered cutting line. We're using a stationary, a traveling guideline. So our guideline is always going to move into the section that we're cutting. And as you watch the video, there's a section on the game plan where you can add some additional key points. So let's get started. So to start with, we're going to take a center section out and create our guide. So once we've got our guide in there, and it's really important that when we're creating this guide that we are making sure it's accurate. Spend some extra time creating your guide. So I'm just going to turn my mannequin, because when we're cutting the crown, it'll be the hair and my body to the side. So I need to cut this first section straight up. My next section, I need to follow the curve of the head. So I'm going to go straight out to follow the curve of the head. And my last section is going to go out, and the head even curves more, so my fingers have to change as well. What I'm cutting this mannequin at is approximately 4.5 inches. you want to be between the 4 and the 5 inches when you cut your mannequin. And the reason for that is because then the mannequin can be used for roller sets still, and for blow dries. It still has some length to be able to be used. So always check and make sure that that is accurate and you are at your 4.5, if that's what you're deciding upon. And once you've got that guide cut, and I just want to remind you that when I cut that, I kind of divided it into 3. So I used one section to cut straight up at 90 degrees, one section which followed the curve of the head here, and the last section almost straight out to complete that curve. So if you want to divide that into 3, so 1, 2, 3, for your first cut, it's sometimes a good idea to do that. So now I'm going to cut my non-dominant side. So this is my guide. So it's going to be, my body position is going to be here, my guide, and then the hair that I'm going to cut. We always have to be able to see our guide, and to help with the sectioning, I'm going to pivot in the crown here. So I'm just going to take pivot shapings to follow the curve of that head, because it's very rounded in the crown. And remember, the size of your subsections is going to depend upon the density of the client's hair. And if you need to take some of that hair down, do that. Take it down. Just make sure you can see your guide. I'm going to take my guide and move it into the section that's being cut. Remember, do not pull the hair to the 6 point, because everything will begin to get longer, and you won't have a uniform haircut. So we need to pull that. There's my section. Pull that into the section. Can see my guide, and now I can just follow the curve of that guideline that I have there. Because I have a good strong guide in there, I can just follow the curve. Every time you can check your length and make sure that you're still okay. And then you're going to take your next section. And I'm just going to divide this last piece into 2. And now I have to take part of my guide, comb it into the section, I can see my guide, so it's me, my guide, and the hair to be cut, and I just follow that curve. And then continue to do the same thing. There's my hair that needs to be cut. I need to take some of my guide, so now it's me, my guide in there, and the hair to be cut. Okay. So once you're done that, then you'll do the same thing on the opposite side. So now my body has to move to the left side. I have to find a bit of my guide. I'm going to add some moisture because I don't want to cut one side dry and one side wet. I'm going to use my diagonal partings. Follow my curved line, because it's curved because it follows the curve of her head. And now remember, I have to take my guide and comb it into the section which I'm cutting. Or else it's going to get long. And then And just continue doing that all the way along to cut the crown area. Following the curve of the client's head. So when you hold this up now, and that's what I was just doing, when you hold this up, you're going to see that it's a little bit longer in the center. You're going to have a curve. So you can see that curved line, and that curve is what follows the shape of her curved head. Okay, so once we've got that crown area cut, what we need to do is check it. And we need to cross check. So we cross check, just divide it in half, hold that hair up horizontally now, make sure you know what hairs are loose and what hairs might be long, and you should see it longer here and slowly curve down to a little shorter here. And you can also at this point measure and make sure that you're the same length throughout, and then we can cut the other side. I apologize, you guys, it's very hard to do a uniform layered haircut. There's our curve without trying to have my arm in the way so you can see. So once we've got that cut and we're satisfied with it, we can take down a small amount of hair. So approximately ½ an inch, maybe a quarter of an inch is enough, but you want to be able to see your guide. So what I'm doing is just taking out the perimeter of that section. So this is my guide here. I'm going to include that in my next section. So it's just going to become part of this section here, just above the occipital bone. So now that becomes our guide. And we're going to start in the center. And this is where now our body position changes. Our body stands straight out from the hair being cut. So we have to be at the end of our comb. We're going to move our body around the head as we're cutting. As we reach in here, this is an area that we have to be cautious of. So our caution zones, we're going to be bringing back a little bit, and I'll explain that when we get to that. It's just as a safety precaution. The other thing I want you to recognize is that your elbow can be a great measuring tool. If you keep your elbow tucked in at your hip and your fingers comb straight out, because this area of the head is not as curved as the crown. This area is, if we put our fingers on there, my finger is almost straight. It just comes straight out. So now we can just tuck our arm into our hip, and there's our guideline, and all we have to do is cut almost straight up and down to follow the guide. So we're cutting palm to palm now. When we cut the crown area, we were cutting above our fingers. We were holding this hair and cutting above our fingers. Here we're cutting palm to palm. Your palms meet. Okay, so if you're doing something and you don't see that your palms could meet, then something's wrong. So this is all palm to palm cutting, the back section and the sides. When we did our blunt haircuts, we combed down and we cut below our fingers. So now we have cut above our fingers, below our fingers, and now palm to palm. Okay, so now I'm going to take the next section, and I have really two guidelines. I can move some of this center section into my next section and use it as a guide, or I can just continue to use the top as a guide. My body takes one step over, closer to her ear, so one step over, so that I am standing directly out. Tuck my elbow into my hip. There's my guide, and just continue to cut down palm to palm. Take your next section, step over so that you're out from the section. You can take some of the previous hair, travel it, move it into, if you would like. So now I can see my guide under there. I can see my guide. But I also have my guide at the top here too. And I go straight out, my body's straight out, and I'm cutting to follow that guide. I can cross check and make sure that I have an even line there. And cross-checking is always when you're holding the hair the opposite way. So if it's cut vertically, like we're doing, we're using vertical sections to cut, we can cross-check horizontal. If it's cut horizontal, we can cross-check vertical. So I continue, just going to turn her, take my section, there's my guide right at the top. I can see my guide underneath as well. I need to comb this hair straight out from that section. My body needs to be positioned right behind that section. And now my last section, this is the caution area. What you need to do, some people refer to this as the red zone whenever we're near the hairline here. What I like to do, and this is optional for you, I know some people just say keep going 90 degrees. I like to take this section and pull it back into halfway into the previous section. So I'm going to take this section, cut it in half. I'm going to comb this one back a little bit. Do you know how we always release the tension in the ear when we were doing a blunt haircut? This is kind of the same thing. We just want to make sure that we don't end up with a hole down here. So by just directing this back a little bit, we can clean up the rest when we do our perimeter. And I would rather have some extra hair there as I do my perimeter than cut this too short. And then when I go to do my perimeter, it's difficult to fix. Sometimes when people are teaching this haircut, they'll also teach to cut your perimeter in first. And that's fine as well. If you want to cut your perimeter in and then you have a point A and a point B to go to, you could also do that. Just make sure your perimeter is the same in all the way around. And sometimes I even leave it a little longer by the ear. Again, just because that's the caution zone. So there's different ways to teach this haircut. This is just one way. So just to review so far, we started with 8 sections. We cut the crown. We did a center section following the curve of the head up at 90 degrees. From that, we cut our non-dominant side, and we moved our guideline. We made that guideline travel into the section being cut, and we followed the curve of the head. We made sure that we were standing on the right when we cut the left. and we were on the left when we cut the right. We made sure that we could see it was our body, the guide, and the hair to be cut as we did that. We cross-checked this. We saw our curve, which followed the shape of the head. Then we brought down some of this hair into these two sections so we could use it as a guide. We started in the center. We pulled that hair directly out, used it as a guide, and cut. Then we moved our body, and we continued to move. When we got to this section, we pulled back a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the rest of this. The only thing I want to mention before I cut the rest is when we get down here, we're going to take out this section just like we did. Now we have a guide, and we're going to do the same thing, center part. And now put your fingers in right at her scalp and pull them straight out. Your fingers will have a slight shift to them. And this is where we talked about, is there a finger shift? There isn't so much a finger shift as much as it is to follow the curve of the head. So we need to put our fingers right against the client's head and bring this out. We can see our guide at the top, and we're just going to follow our fingers and again cut palm to palm. Okay, so this remains your 4.5, 5 inches. And we're just going to keep cutting. When you get to here, you need to pull this back into the previous section. I'm going to go ahead and cut the back area, and I'll see you when we cut the sides and the top.